You ever move somewhere thinking it's gonna be your forever home? Yeah, that was me. When we first drove into the neighborhood, everything looked straight out of one of those picture-perfect magazines. You know the kind, freshly cut grass, identical mailboxes, people jogging with their golden retrievers. The kind of place where every house looks like it was copy-pasted from a builder's dream catalog. It was calm, it was clean, it was, honestly, kind of creepy how perfect it all was. But I told myself, hey, maybe this is what peace looks like. We'd been living in the city for years, traffic, noise, neighbors who thought midnight karaoke was a human right. So when we found this quiet neighborhood with an HOA, we thought, finally. Some structure, some order, maybe even a place to breathe a little. The HOA brochure promised things like community harmony and neighborhood pride. I thought it sounded fancy, like we'd joined some secret club for civilized people who actually return shopping carts. So we signed the papers, moved in, and started to settle down. Our house was beautiful. Big backyard, nice little patio, and a small shed that looked perfect for, well, chickens. Now, before you judge me, I'm not some off-the-grid, backyard farm in the city person. I just wanted a few hens. You know, fresh eggs, teach the kids some responsibility, maybe save a few bucks on groceries. Nothing wild. And to be fair, I did glance over the HOA covenants before we bought the house. But it was a thick booklet, full of legal mumbo-jumbo. Half the time I wasn't sure if I was reading neighborhood rules or preparing for the bar exam. So when it said no livestock, I figured that meant no goats, no cows, no horses, actual livestock. Chickens didn't even cross my mind. I mean, come on, a couple of chickens? They're smaller than half the dogs on this street. Anyway, for the first few weeks, life was good. Every morning I'd step outside, coffee in hand, and just enjoy the silence. You could hear sprinklers going off, birds chirping, and the occasional sound of someone complaining about crabgrass. It felt peaceful. The neighbors smiled when they saw us, at least, at first. There was this one older lady across the street who always waved from her porch like she was auditioning for a Hallmark movie. The guy next door offered to lend me his ladder. Everything seemed fine. Then, one afternoon, I told my wife, you know what? Let's get a few hens. We went down to a little farm supply store, picked out 6 fluffy little chicks, and brought them home. The kids were obsessed. We built them a cute little coop behind the shed, tucked away, clean, nothing that would bother anyone. For the first few weeks, it was perfect. We had happy hens, fresh eggs every morning, and even the neighbors' kids would come by to peek at them. I thought we'd made it, peaceful suburban life, small backyard project, no drama. But peace in an HOA neighborhood doesn't last long. It started small, like a storm you don't see coming. One morning, I noticed a note taped to my front door. White paper, typed, with way too much bold font. It said something like, "Dear homeowner, we've received a report of unauthorized livestock being kept on your property. Please remove them immediately to remain in compliance with HOA regulations." I laughed at first. Unauthorized livestock? What, did they think I had a herd of buffalo back there? I figured it was a misunderstanding. Maybe someone saw the coop and assumed we were running a mini farm. So I called the HOA office and explained, hey, these aren't livestock, just a few pet hens. They're quiet, clean, and staying in our yard. The woman on the phone didn't sound amused. She said, sir, chickens fall under the category of livestock as defined by our community covenants. I said, really? Because they're smaller than my neighbor's dog. Should I file a complaint about that too? She didn't laugh. Not even a chuckle. That's when I realized this wasn't going to be a friendly chat. Over the next week, the letters kept coming. Each one a little sterner, a little more official. The kind of tone that makes you feel like you're on trial for feeding pigeons in a park. And that's when I started noticing the looks. The same neighbors who used to wave suddenly found their shoes really interesting whenever I passed by. The lady from across the street stopped saying hello. The HOA president, a guy who looked like he practiced smiling in a mirror, started driving by our house a lot. It was subtle at first, but I could feel it. the calm, peaceful suburb I thought I'd moved into was starting to shift. And deep down, I had this weird feeling like something small was about to turn into something ridiculous. Because apparently, 6 chickens were about to break the entire neighborhood's peace treaty. I remember telling my wife that night, "It's fine. They can't actually do anything over a few hens." Spoiler alert, I was wrong. We had no idea the HOA was about to call the police on us. I'll never forget the first time I actually read the HOA rulebook. You know how they say don't read the fine print? Yeah, I learned why. So after that first warning letter about my chickens, I figured, okay, maybe I should double check what the rules actually say. I dug through the mountain of closing documents from when we bought the house, and there it was, a thick binder labeled covenants, conditions, and restrictions. 200 pages. I'm not kidding. 200 pages. It felt less like a neighborhood handbook and more like a medieval scroll of laws written by someone who hated joy. The cover even had this gold HOA logo on it, like they thought they were the United Nations of suburbia. So, coffee in hand, I sat down on the couch, opened to page 1, and started reading. By page 3, I realized I had entered another universe, one where freedom and common sense had gone to die. For example, there was an entire section on approved mailbox designs. Apparently, your mailbox has to be HOA standard model #3B, painted in regulation bronze. Not gold, not black bronze. Because, heaven forbid, your mailbox expresses individuality. Then came the landscaping section, 12 pages long. According to the CCNRS, you can't have more than 2 garden gnomes, your grass can't be over 3 inches tall, and my favorite, no pink flowers visible from the street. Pink flowers. They banned pink flowers. I remember looking around my living room like, is this real life? By the time I got to section 9, subsection 12, paragraph C, I hit the infamous line. No livestock or poultry of any kind shall be kept, raised, or bred on any lot. There it was, my chicken's death sentence. I read it again, hoping maybe I misunderstood. Nope. The rule was clear. Chickens were officially outlaws in suburbia. Apparently, in the eyes of the HOA, a couple of quiet hens were a bigger threat than porch pirates or car thieves. And it wasn't just chickens, they had rules banning backyard clotheslines, too. You know, those simple lines people use to dry clothes in the sun? Yeah, those. Visually displeasing to the community aesthetic, the rulebook said. So basically, chickens, pink flowers, and clean laundry were the unholy trinity of neighborhood crimes. I could almost hear the HOA board meeting that created this nonsense. Ladies and gentlemen, we have to protect the property values. Who knows what chaos might unfold if someone plants a rosebush that's too pink? The deeper I read, the worse it got. They even had a clause about how long your garage door could stay open. I'm not joking. Garage doors shall not remain open for more than 10 minutes when not in active use. 10 minutes. What do they think I'm doing in there, building a nuclear reactor? And don't even get me started on the section about seasonal decorations. Apparently, you can't put up Christmas lights before December 1st, and you have to take them down by January 5th or risk a fine. So if your kid's sick and you're a few days late, boom, $100 penalty for non-compliance with decorative timelines. Reading that rulebook was like discovering I'd moved into a neighborhood run by mall cops with clipboards. It was ridiculous, but it also explained a lot. It explained why everyone's lawn looked like a golf course. Why no one had curtains that didn't match their siding. Why the lady across the street once called the HOA because someone parked a pickup truck too close to her mailbox. This wasn't a community. This was a dictatorship with landscaping. And at the top of this suburban food chain sat the HOA board, a handful of self-appointed rule enforcers who took their power very seriously. You could tell just by how the rulebook was written. It wasn't, hey neighbor, let's keep things nice. No. It was full-on legal drama. Every sentence started with shall, must, or will be subject to enforcement action. It made me wonder, do these people actually enjoy their lives? Or do they just wake up every morning thinking about whose fence paint they can regulate next? Still, part of me thought, maybe they'll be reasonable. Maybe if I explain that my chickens are quiet and harmless, they'll let it slide. So I drafted an email. Polite, respectful, maybe even a little naive. I explained how my hens stayed in their coop, didn't make noise, and were well cared for. I even offered to show them photos of the setup. Their reply? A single paragraph that started with, per HOA regulations, and ended with, failure to comply may result in daily fines. No empathy. No compromise. Just the rulebook, that cursed, bureaucratic Bible of boredom, thrown back in my face. That's when it hit me, this wasn't about chickens anymore. This was about control. And once an HOA smells defiance, they don't back down, they double down. I closed that binder, set it on the table, and said to myself, all right. If they want to play by the book, then I'm about to learn every page of it. Because if they were gonna turn this into a fight, I wasn't planning to lose. You know what's funny? This whole thing didn't even start as some rebellious stick it to the HOA mission. It started with breakfast. Yeah. Just breakfast. See, before all the drama, before the letters, the board meetings, and the police, I just wanted some fresh eggs. Simple as that. It was one of those slow Saturday mornings when the idea hit me. I was scrolling online, half awake, watching some guy on YouTube collecting eggs from his backyard hens. He looked peaceful, like the world could be burning down, but he'd still be there, coffee in one hand, basket of eggs in the other. I thought, man, that's the dream. Fresh food, no store trips, no chemicals, no stress. Just you, your yard, and a few happy chickens living their best lives. Plus, the idea of self-sufficiency always appealed to me. You know that feeling when you fix something yourself or grow your own veggies? That quiet little yeah, I did that pride? I wanted more of that. And let's be real, grocery store eggs are getting expensive. Like, we might have to start taking out a loan for omelets expensive. So I told my wife, what if we got a few chickens? Just enough to keep us in eggs? She looked at me for a second, probably trying to figure out if I was serious, and then said, you mean like, actual chickens? Yeah, I said. The feathered kind. We laughed, but then we started talking about it, really talking about it. The kids were into it too. My son thought we could name one Cluck Norris. My daughter wanted a hen solo. It became this fun little family idea, something wholesome we could all do together. It wasn't about rebellion or rule breaking. It was about family. About doing something real. About teaching our kids that food doesn't just appear in a carton, that it comes from living, breathing animals you care for. So, before buying the chicks, I did what any responsible suburban dad does, I Googled it. Are backyard chickens legal in our city? And guess what? They were. The city's official website said residents were allowed to keep up to 6 hens, no roosters, as long as they were kept clean and didn't disturb the neighbors. Pretty reasonable, right? No big red flags, no thou shalt not cluck laws. So I figured, okay, if the city says yes, then what can the HOA possibly say? Turns out, a lot. But at the time, I didn't know that. At that point, all I saw was a green light. We found this adorable little farm store just outside town. The lady there helped us pick out 6 fluffy baby chicks, soft little balls of golden brown, peeping like wind-up toys. We named them right there in the car. Cluck Norris, Hen Solo, Nugget, Omelette, Drumstick, and Beyonce. Don't ask. My daughter was going through a phase. We brought them home, set up a warm brooder box, and for the next few weeks, it was like living in a Disney movie. Every morning, the kids would run to check on them before school. Every night, we'd peek in on them like proud parents. I even started reading up on how to build a proper coop, watched a few DIY videos, sketched some ideas, and before long, I had a plan. A small, clean, sturdy coop behind the shed. Far from any neighbors, easy to maintain, and, I thought, well within the rules. Honestly, I felt good about it. I wasn't breaking any laws. I wasn't bothering anyone. I was just trying to live a little closer to nature, in the middle of suburbia. And for a while, it worked. There's something peaceful about collecting eggs from your own hens. It's like the simplest thing suddenly feels meaningful. Every egg felt like a tiny victory. We started eating breakfast together again, real breakfast. Fresh eggs, pancakes, laughter. The kind of thing that feels rare these days. I remember thinking, this is what I wanted. It wasn't about saving money or making a statement. It was about creating something small and beautiful that belonged to us. And honestly, I thought we were doing everything right. We checked the city laws, kept the coop clean, didn't have any roosters to crow at 5 a.m. I even made sure the coop didn't smell or attract flies. We were quiet, respectful, totally normal. But apparently, in HOA world, normal means something completely different. Because a few weeks later, when that first letter landed on my door, it felt like reality slapped me across the face. I remember standing there with that paper in my hand, thinking, wait, they're serious? Over this? That's when I started realizing how deep this rabbit hole, or, I guess, chicken coop, went. The HOA didn't care about my intentions, or that my kids were learning responsibility, or that the city said it was fine. They cared about control. About their rule book. About keeping everything so uniform that no one could breathe without permission. And that's when I made a little promise to myself and to my chickens. If they were gonna make this a battle, I was going to fight it. Calmly. Smartly. Legally. Because, honestly, it wasn't about rebellion. It was about breakfast. If peace had a sound, it'd be the soft clucking of 6 happy chickens on a quiet morning. Those first few weeks were perfect. Every day, I'd step outside with my coffee, the sun barely peeking over the rooftops, and hear that gentle chatter from the coop like my little feathered roommates were gossiping about me. It was peaceful. Wholesome. Therapeutic, even. Sometimes, I'd just stand there for a few minutes, mug in hand, breathing in that fresh morning air, before the HOA smog of nonsense rolled in. The kids loved feeding them, too. They'd toss little handfuls of grain and laugh when the hens came running like tiny, feathery velociraptors. Even the neighbors seemed curious at first. The guy 2 houses down, Rick, leaned over the fence one day and said, "You got chickens back there?" I nodded. He grinned. "Man, that's awesome. Always wanted some, but my wife says they're too rural." Too rural, I didn't even know that was a category of crime yet. Another neighbor brought her grandkids over to see them. The kids were thrilled. They petted the hens, asked questions, took pictures. Everything felt good. Then one morning, it happened, the big moment. I walked out to check the coop, and there it was. A single, perfect, brown egg sitting in the nesting box like a tiny trophy. I'm not gonna lie, I might have done a little victory dance. Don't judge me. It was months of planning, building, and worrying, all leading up to that one beautiful egg. I called my wife and kids outside like we just won the lottery. Everyone crowded around, staring at it like it was made of gold. That egg wasn't just breakfast, it was proof that our little backyard project worked. I took a picture, obviously. Posted it online with the caption, "First egg from our backyard hens. Suburban farming level, unlocked." Life was good. For about 2 days. Then came the letter. I came home from work one afternoon and saw something taped to our front door. White envelope. HOA letterhead. You know that feeling when your stomach just knows it's bad news? Yeah, that. I peeled it off and opened it right there on the porch. Notice of violation. Livestock found on property. This is a breach of HOA covenants, Section 12, subsection B. Remove all animals immediately or face fines of $100 per day until compliance is achieved. Livestock. They made it sound like I was harboring a herd of cows in the living room. I read it again, just to make sure I wasn't hallucinating. Nope. They really wrote that. Apparently, the sound of happiness violates Section 12, subsection B. I stood there for a minute, just kind of stunned. My first egg, my little suburban victory, had officially turned into a federal case in the eyes of the HOA. My wife came out and saw me holding the letter. "What's that?" I handed it to her. She read it, rolled her eyes, and said, "You've got to be kidding me." I wasn't. And neither were they. At the bottom of the notice, in bold, it said, "Failure to comply may result in further action, including but not limited to legal proceedings." Legal proceedings. Over chickens. I couldn't help but laugh. So what, they're gonna subpoena Nugget? But beneath the laughter, I could feel it, that creeping tension. The kind that tells you something small is about to snowball into something ridiculous. I tried to be reasonable. I thought, maybe they just don't understand. Maybe if I explain it clearly, that the city allows it, that they're quiet, clean, and fenced, they'll chill out. So I sent them an email. A polite one. "Hi there. I believe there's been a misunderstanding. We have a few hens, no roosters, all contained and permitted by city ordinance. Please advise if there's any way to keep them within compliance." I even attached a picture of the coop, clean, tidy, tucked behind the shed like a Pinterest project. 2 days later, I got a reply. Per HOA regulations, livestock of any kind are prohibited. Failure to remove the animals by Friday will result in fines. No greeting. No name. Just that cold, robotic tone that screams power trip. That's when it started sinking in, this wasn't going away. The same people who wrote 200 pages about mailbox colors were now coming for my chickens. It wasn't about noise, or smell, or complaints from neighbors, because no one had complained. Not one person. It was about control. About enforcing the rulebook from hell, no matter how ridiculous it made them look. I remember that night, sitting at the kitchen table, holding that letter and looking out the window at the coop. The hens were sleeping peacefully, unaware that they'd just become suburban fugitives. It was funny, but also kind of sad, that something so small and harmless could bother people so much. Still, I wasn't ready to give up. Not after one notice. Not after that first egg. Because that egg, that single, perfect little egg, reminded me why we started in the first place. It wasn't about breaking rules. It was about building something simple and good in a world that loves to complicate everything. And if the HOA thought they could scare us into backing down, they were about to find out something important. We don't scare that easy. They say you can't fight City Hall. Turns out, you can, but fighting an HOA? That's a whole different level of ridiculous. After that second notice, I decided to do something crazy, use facts. I sat down at my computer, pulled up the city ordinances, and started reading. And sure enough, right there in black and white, it said, "Residents may keep up to 6 hens for personal use. Roosters prohibited." No ambiguity. No legal jargon. Just plain, simple language. I felt like I'd found the golden ticket. So I drafted an email back to the HOA. Polite, firm, and just a little spicy. According to City Ordinance 5.14, hens are permitted within city limits as long as they're properly contained. Since we're in full compliance with city law, we'd appreciate clarification on why our chickens are being treated as livestock. I even attached screenshots of the law, highlighted, bolded, the whole deal. Hit send. Sat back. Smiled. For about 24 hours, I felt unstoppable. Like I just mic dropped my way out of suburban nonsense. But then came the reply. "Dear homeowner, the HOA's covenants, conditions, and restrictions (CC&RS) supersede city ordinances within our community boundaries. The keeping of poultry remains strictly prohibited. Failure to comply will result in daily fines." Supersede. That word hit me like a slap. They were basically saying, yeah, we know it's legal, we just don't care. I remember reading it out loud to my wife, and she just shook her head. So, the city says yes, but the HOA says no. Who do they think they are? And I said, apparently, the government of Suburbia. That was the moment I decided if they were gonna make this a war, I wasn't showing up empty-handed. So what did I do? I got more chickens. Yup. You heard me. If they hated 2, they were gonna love 100. Okay, fine, it wasn't literally 100. But it sure felt like it when they all started clucking together. We added a few more hens, all legal under city law, mind you, and I built a second coop. Clean, organized, professional looking. I even installed a little fence and put up a cute fresh eggs sign like we were running a suburban bed and breakfast for birds. Was it a little petty? Sure. Was it symbolic? Absolutely. Every new hen felt like a tiny feathered protest sign that said, "I live here too." And honestly, the neighborhood noticed. Some people loved it. The guy down the street gave me a thumbs up every time he walked his dog. A couple of neighbors stopped by to say they admired what we were doing. One lady even whispered, "Finally, someone's standing up to them." But others, not so much. I started noticing blinds shifting when I was outside. Little whispers when I walked by. You could feel the street dividing, Team Chicken versus Team HOA. The same folks who used to wave at me now gave me that tight-lipped smile, the kind that says, "I'm pretending to be polite, but I already emailed the board about you." And that's when I started hearing rumors. Apparently, the HOA president, a guy named Carl, who wore polos like a uniform, was furious. He'd been spotted marching around the neighborhood with a clipboard, muttering something about property values and anarchy. Then one evening, a neighbor texted me. "Hey, heads up, the HOA just called an emergency board meeting. Pretty sure it's about you." I laughed at first. An emergency meeting? For chickens? But then I thought about it, and the absurdity started to sink in. Somewhere in that little clubhouse, a group of grown adults was gathering to discuss my hens. I pictured it like a movie scene. A long table. Dramatic lighting. Carl slamming his fist down, yelling, "He's building his second coop." Meanwhile, the treasurer's in the corner whispering, "What if the chickens start a movement?" Honestly, it was hilarious and terrifying all at once. That night, I stood by the window, looking out at the coops. The hens were all asleep, peaceful as ever, unaware that they were the most controversial citizens in the neighborhood. And I realized something: the HOA wasn't just trying to get rid of chickens. They were trying to make an example out of us. Because if they let one family question the rulebook, others might start doing the same. This wasn't about birds anymore. It was about power. The next morning, I woke up to another letter on my door. Notice of violation escalation, continued non-compliance. Immediate action required. Board will pursue further enforcement measures. No details. No humanity. Just threats printed in Times New Roman. I took the letter, walked to the backyard, and taped it right to the coop. "Congratulations, girls," I said. "You're officially famous." The hens clucked, probably wondering if this meant extra feed. I smiled. Because even though things were heating up, even though I knew they were planning something, I wasn't backing down. Not after all this. Not after the laughter, the eggs, the lessons for my kids. They wanted to turn our peaceful home into a battlefield? Fine. But I wasn't the one who started this chicken uprising, they were. I used to think HOA board members just handled landscaping budgets and Christmas decorations. Turns out, mine had decided to become full-time chicken detectives. It started small. I'd notice cars slowing down in front of our house, stopping just long enough for someone inside to snap a photo. Then they'd drive off, real casual, like they were in some kind of low-budget spy movie. At first, I thought I was imagining it. But then one morning, while I was feeding the hens, I caught them red-handed, or red-iPhoned, I guess. It was Carl, the HOA president himself, parked across the street, pretending to check his GPS, camera zoomed right at my backyard. I waved. Big smile. Coffee mug in hand. He didn't wave back. Just sped off like he'd been caught doing something illegal. From that day on, the surveillance went full throttle. Every week, without fail, I'd get a new violation report in the mail. Each one more dramatic than the last. Unauthorized livestock activity observed on multiple occasions. Continued defiance constitutes escalating non-compliance. Photos on file for documentation purposes. It was like they were building a case against a crime ring, except the ring was 6 confused hens and a guy trying to make omelets. They even started sending printed photos with the letters, blurry shots of my chickens doing absolutely nothing criminal. One photo literally showed Nuggets standing in the grass. That was it. Caption: evidence of ongoing livestock presence. I swear, the next one might as well have said hen caught breathing air, Section 12 violation. So, naturally, I did the mature thing. I named the chickens after the board members. That's right. We had Karen the Clucker, Carl Jr., Henjamin Franklin, Clucky Chan, Feather Locklear, and Judge Peckins. I told my wife it was my way of coping, turning chaos into comedy. She told me it was adding fuel to the fire. She wasn't wrong. But it felt good. Every morning, I'd step outside and say, "Good morning, Madam President," while tossing feed to Karen the Clucker. The neighbors who were in on the joke started cracking up. One even whispered, "You're a legend." But not everyone was laughing. The HOA board was furious. Apparently, someone, I wonder who, reported me for mocking board officials in a public and defamatory manner. I couldn't believe it. Defamatory? She's a chicken, Carl. Soon after, they started escalating. I'd come home to new warning letters taped to my door like angry little reminders of how serious they thought this was. They threatened $100 fines. Then $250. Then $500 a week. One letter even said, failure to comply will result in the matter being referred to legal counsel. They meant it, too. Because not long after, things got weirder. One morning, I heard voices outside. Peeking through the blinds, I saw 2 board members standing inside my side yard, clipboards in hand, pointing at the coop like they were inspecting a crime scene. That was my breaking point. I stepped outside and said, "Can I help you?" Carl froze mid-photo. "We're conducting a compliance review," he said, like he was auditioning for CSI, Suburbia. I smiled. "Oh, good. Want to meet the ladies?" Before he could answer, I opened the coop and out came Karen the Clucker, strutting proudly. "This one's named after you," I said. The look on his face? Priceless. Somewhere between confusion, anger, and mild embarrassment. The other board member tried not to laugh. I could tell she didn't want to be there. She mumbled something about procedures and documentation, and they both left fast. That night, I got another letter. Trespassing accusations against board members are unfounded. The HOA reserves the right to inspect for compliance. Oh, so now it's their yard? It felt like living in a sitcom, except the laugh track was replaced by the sound of distant clucking and the faint rustle of legal envelopes. But despite the drama, I refused to let them kill the humor. When they sent a letter threatening fines, I replied with a photo of the hens wearing tiny party hats and the caption, "Still in violation, still fabulous." When they sent evidence photos, I printed one, framed it, and hung it above the coop. Official HOA recognition, the plaque underneath read. Every small act of defiance felt empowering. Because the more they tried to intimidate me, the more ridiculous they looked. I started documenting everything, every letter, every photo, every inspection. It was all going into my little file I titled Operation Cluckstorm. And then, just when I thought things couldn't get any more absurd, they did. It was a Wednesday afternoon. Quiet. Peaceful. I was cleaning out the coop when I noticed a white envelope slipped under my front door. No return address this time, just my name, typed in bold. Inside, one sentence. The HOA has retained legal counsel to address your continued non-compliance. I just stood there, staring at the letter, the chickens clucking softly behind me. They actually did it. They brought in the lawyer. So, they brought in the big guns. I knew it was serious when a thick white envelope with an intimidating watermark showed up on my doorstep. No clucking, no warning, just the cold, official smell of doom. Inside? A cease and desist letter from the HOA's attorney. Dear homeowner. It has come to our attention that unauthorized livestock is being kept on your property. You are hereby directed to remove all animals immediately to avoid further legal action, including injunctive relief and monetary damages. Sincerely, Law Offices of Stern and Hardline. I stared at it for a solid 2 minutes, coffee halfway to my mouth, wondering if I should just give up eggs and become vegan. Then I laughed. Out loud. The hens looked at me like, really? Again? See, I wasn't about to let some overpriced suit tell me my chickens were criminals. I'd done my homework, and I was about to get smart. I called a lawyer friend first, the one who always talks in legal jargon that makes your head hurt, and explained the situation. He chuckled. You do know they're trying to bully you with chickens? Yep, I said. And I'm okay with this. I kind of like it. He smiled. Good. Now, here's the thing, read the HOACC and RS carefully. They might be trying to scare you, but sometimes these rulebooks have gaps. So I pulled out the binder, the thick, dust-gathering monster that started it all. I flipped through it page by page, highlighting the word livestock every time it appeared. And then I saw it. Somewhere in the legal labyrinth of Section 12, subsection B, the HOA defined livestock. Cows, goats, sheep, pigs, a whole parade of barnyard animals, each described in painful detail. Chickens? Not a single mention. I read it again. Then a third time. Not listed. Not defined. Not addressed. In other words, loophole city. I did a little victory fist pump. Ladies, I said to the hens, we may have just outsmarted suburbia. Next, I crafted a reply to the HOA's attorney. Carefully. Legally. And yes, with a little bit of sass. Dear Counsel. After careful review of the covenants, conditions, and restrictions CC&RS of neighborhood name, we have determined that while the document prohibits livestock, it does not specifically define or include poultry within that category. Therefore, the hens residing at address do not fall under the definition of livestock as outlined in the governing documents. We request that the cease and desist be rescinded. Sincerely. My name. I hit send. Then I waited. Hours passed. Nothing. I started thinking maybe they were stunned into silence. Maybe the attorney was sitting there, coffee in hand, muttering, they did what? They called chickens poultry? Then the reply came. Your interpretation of the CC&RS is noted. However, the HOA board maintains that the keeping of chickens constitutes a violation of Section 12, subsection B. Additional enforcement action may be considered. Ah, yes. The HOA didn't like being outsmarted. That's when I realized this wasn't just about chickens anymore. This was a power struggle. I wasn't just defending my hens. I was defending the idea that a neighborhood board cannot arbitrarily reinterpret rules to fit their whims. The best part? Every letter they sent gave me more ammunition. Each threatening line, each misused clause, each dramatic enforcement action, it all went into my folder. Operation Cluckstorm was growing by the day. I even started documenting the timing, the dates, the content. It felt oddly satisfying, like a mix of strategy game and detective work. And in the meantime, my little backyard army remained oblivious. Karen the clucker, Hen Solo, and Beyoncé were pecking and clucking like nothing had changed. They were living proof that simplicity and innocence could survive bureaucracy, at least for now. I called my lawyer friend again. So? I technically win, right? He laughed. Technically? You found a loophole. The HOA doesn't like it, but you're in the clear legally. Now it's just a game of endurance. Endurance. That word stuck with me. Because this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The HOA could write letters. They could hire more lawyers. They could stage midnight stakeouts. But one thing was certain, they hadn't counted on me, my research, or the power of a loophole. And they definitely hadn't counted on the hens. I leaned against the coop, watching Nugget strut proudly. Karen the clucker pecked at the dirt like she owned the place, and maybe she did. For the first time, I felt a flicker of confidence. We were ready. Because in the world of suburban warfare, knowledge is power, loopholes are weapons, and sometimes, 6 little chickens can stand up to an entire HOA. Suburbia has a funny way of showing its true colors, and my little chicken rebellion proved it. Suddenly, the neighborhood wasn't just a quiet place with perfect lawns. It was a battlefield. Some neighbors cheered us on. You could tell just by the subtle signs, a thumbs up when they drove by, a wink at the corner of their eye, little sticky notes on our mailbox that said things like "Free the chickens" or "Hen solidarity." Others, not so much. The same people who used to smile politely suddenly crossed the street when I walked by. I'd hear whispers over fences, see blinds twitch when I stepped outside. Some neighbors looked at me like I'd personally orchestrated the downfall of civilization. One day, I found a small envelope tucked under my gate. No return address. Inside, just a note in sharp black ink. You are ruining this neighborhood. Remove the animals immediately. Ah, yes. The anonymous outrage of suburban warriors. I held the note up for the hens to see. Karen the clucker pecked at it. I think she agreed. But it didn't stop there. A week later, animal control showed up. Apparently, someone had reported us. My heart sank. This was serious, real, official, government people. I met the inspector at the gate. She was young, friendly, and surprisingly practical. Okay, she said, clipboard in hand, let's take a look. I walked her through the coop. Showed her the enclosed runs, the food, the water, the nesting boxes. Even let her hold Beyoncé, who, I swear, struck a perfect "I'm innocent" pose. She laughed. These are perfectly fine. Clean, healthy, well kept. You're within the city regulations. I exhaled. Relief washed over me. Still, the HOA wasn't done. Fines started rolling in. One letter, $100. Then $250. Then $500 for continued violation of livestock restrictions. The irony? My chickens weren't livestock, but the letters kept coming. It was like watching a train hit a wall in slow motion. Absurd, relentless, and slightly entertaining if you squinted. Some nights, I'd sit on the back porch, surrounded by the soft clucking of my army, and think about the isolation this had created. Neighbors who once waved now avoided eye contact. Casual invitations to coffee or block parties disappeared. It was as if standing up for a few harmless hens automatically marked me as the enemy. But alongside that isolation was stubborn pride. Every letter, every note, every sideways glance reinforced that I was doing the right thing. Not just for me, but for the kids, for the little lessons about responsibility, courage, and standing your ground. I started documenting everything: letters, notes, fines, photos of inspections. Every interaction became part of the story, part of the evidence that this was about more than chickens. Some evenings were heavy. I'd look out at the coops, the quiet yard, the soft fluttering of wings, and think, why me? But then a little egg would appear in the nesting box. Or Hen Solo would do a perfect little strut like she owned the place. And I'd remember, this wasn't just about food. It was about life, dignity, and refusing to be bullied by bureaucracy. Neighbors who supported us started becoming more visible. One morning, someone left a basket of muffins on our porch with a note, "Hang in there, Chicken Commander." Another neighbor casually mentioned at a block party, "If I had chickens, I'd be right there with you." It was comforting. Small acts of solidarity reminded me that I wasn't completely alone. That even in the rigid world of HOA rules, there was a community that understood reason and fairness. But the tension never fully went away. Every time someone drove slowly past our house, every time a neighbor peered through blinds, every time another fine arrived in the mail, it reminded me we were under siege. And yet, through it all, the hens remained blissfully ignorant of the political drama surrounding them. Clucky Chan didn't care about fines. Drumstick didn't notice the whispers over the fence. They just existed. Simple. Peaceful. Defiant in their own way. Standing there, amidst the soft clucking, the papers, and the tension, I realized something important. Isolation hurts. Constant pressure wears you down. But stubborn pride, the kind that comes from standing up for what's right, can be surprisingly powerful. I leaned against the fence, watching the sun dip behind the rooftops. Shadows stretched long, the neighborhood quiet except for the hens. And I thought, they can keep sending letters. They can keep calling meetings. They can keep trying to divide the street. But as long as the coop stands and the eggs keep coming, I'm not backing down. Because sometimes, keeping a few hens is about more than breakfast. It's about principle. And the battle? Oh, it's only getting started. You know that saying, sunlight is the best disinfectant? Turns out, it's also great for chickens. It started small. A few neighbors caught wind of the story, the anonymous notes, the fines, the board inspections, and started talking. Then one afternoon, my cousin texted me. Dude, I just saw your backyard hens on the local newsfeed. They made a whole post about HOA tyranny. You're famous. Famous. 4 chickens. At first, I laughed so hard I nearly dropped my coffee. Apparently, someone at a local paper had picked up the story. They called it the Great Chicken Controversy, when backyard hens meet HOA horror. There I was, standing in the yard with Beyoncé perched on my shoulder, looking like a suburban chicken whisperer. Comments started pouring in. Free the chickens. Finally, someone fighting for the little guys. Karen the clucker is a hero. I had no idea suburban poultry could spark such passion. And then came social media. I posted pictures of the coops, little videos of the hens strutting, and a shot of the first egg with the caption, Section 12, Subsection B, Meet Reality. Within hours, the post went semi-viral. Neighbors started sharing, tagging friends, even making memes. A picture of Carl from the HOA with a thought bubble, why won't they obey the law of bronze mailboxes? Another one, Karen the clucker photoshopped with a tiny crown and cape. Caption, Queen of Suburbia. The humor was unstoppable. And it was contagious. The HOA board? Not so much. I could almost hear them in their meetings, flustered and red-faced. Apparently, having the public ridicule your every move isn't exactly fun, especially when you're supposed to be the authority. And the neighbors who had once avoided me? Some of them started giving subtle nods of approval. A few even brought over little gifts, extra chicken feed, homemade treats, or just notes that said things like, "We support the henhouse." It was weirdly heartwarming. The media exposure shifted the power dynamic. Before, it was letters, fines, inspections, a slow, bureaucratic squeeze. Now, every move the HOA made was public. Every threat could be photographed, shared, and laughed at. They had authority on paper. But in sunlight, the bright, harsh glare of community awareness, they looked small and petty. I remember standing on the porch one morning, the hens clucking behind me, and realizing something important. The more people see, the less power fear has. And that's when the memes hit the next level. Someone posted a video of Nugget waddling across the yard with dramatic orchestral music. Another neighbor made a Photoshop of the board members running from a giant chicken coop like it was a disaster movie. Even local news ran a follow-up, Suburban Chickens vs. HOA, who will win? The story became about more than just me. It was about every homeowner who had felt bullied, every person who had ever been fined for a perfectly reasonable choice, and every backyard animal silently judged by a clipboard-wielding overlord. I'll admit, it felt pretty good. One afternoon, I opened my front gate to find a small bag of chicken feed on the porch. No note, just a smiley face drawn on the bag. I held it up to the hens. See? People get it. People really get it. Beyoncé looked unimpressed. Karen the clucker tilted her head like she was judging me for overreacting. And yet, the point stood. Exposure works. Public scrutiny works. Humor works. And sometimes, a little clucking rebellion is all it takes to remind people that power has limits. The board tried to respond. Another letter came in, stiff and legal sounding, threatening further fines and legal remedies. I stared at it for a moment, then set it down beside my laptop. I could almost hear the internet laughing at them. And honestly, that was satisfying. Because in that moment, I realized something: you can't hide behind rules when the world is watching. And sometimes, the best way to fight absurdity isn't just with letters and lawyers, it's with sunlight, humor, and a few tiny, determined chickens. By the end of the week, things were in full swing. The neighborhood was divided, the board was scrambling, and the hens were living their best lives. And me? I was finally starting to feel like we weren't just surviving this. We were winning. Even if it was one egg at a time. I've had stressful days before, sure, deadlines at work, taxes, a burnt Thanksgiving turkey. But nothing prepared me for this: walking into the HOA clubhouse, clutching a binder thicker than my high school yearbook, facing a room full of board members who clearly believed they were the law of the land. The notice called it a formal hearing to decide your punishment. Punishment. Over chickens. I took a deep breath, set my coffee on the table, black, like my simmering patience, and laid out my evidence. Binder open. Sections highlighted. Photos neatly labeled. Even a small chart showing chickens is not equal to livestock, per city ordinance. Carl, the president, leaned forward. Do you understand why you're here? I smiled. Absolutely. I also brought the CC&RS, in case anyone else forgot theirs. The room stiffened. I started flipping through the binder, pointing to section after section. Here we are, section 12, subsection B, lists cattle, sheep, goats, pigs, and other defined livestock. Chickens are not mentioned. Heads tilted. A couple of board members squinted at the pages like it was ancient hieroglyphics. I continued. And here's the city ordinance. Up to 6 hens allowed per household. No roosters. You see? We are in full compliance with local law. Which, last I checked, still applies even in an HOA community. A murmur ran through the room. A young board member, barely 5 minutes into adulthood, whispered, "I didn't realize that." I didn't let it slip. I pressed on. "If you're going to enforce the rules," I said, glancing around, "at least read them. Know what they actually say. Otherwise, you risk punishing someone for nothing." Karen the clucker would have approved. I imagined her pecking at the board president's gavel in silent solidarity. Carl's face turned a shade redder than his polo. That's a technicality. I chuckled. Yes. A loophole, by your own definitions. A mistake, if you will. And unfortunately for the board, enforcing your rules properly would require rewriting the entire covenant. You do realize that, right? The room went quiet. Not tense, quiet, stunned. Like someone just flicked a light switch labeled reality. Then the cracks started showing. One of the older members cleared her throat. Well, technically, he's right. We didn't list poultry. Maybe we overlooked that. Another member muttered, I mean, who even thought we'd have chickens? Carl's jaw tightened. He opened his mouth to argue, then stopped. Maybe he realized every word would be turned back at him. I leaned back in my chair, flipping to another page in the binder. And here's your own newsletter from last year, promising flexibility and fairness in rule enforcement. Yet somehow, a few hens broke the universe. A couple of board members snorted quietly, but unmistakably. I knew I had them. Not legally, though the law was on my side, but psychologically. Public embarrassment. Logic. And the undeniable absurdity of the situation. They tried to regroup, calling for votes on appropriate fines and corrective action. I watched carefully, my notebook ready to document every hesitation, every glance of doubt. First vote, $500 fine. Lost. Second vote, removal of chickens. Lost. Third vote, any action whatsoever. Half abstained, one finally muttered, maybe we should just leave it? The room shifted uncomfortably. cracks were widening. Carl's voice wavered for the first time all day. We can't. Exactly. They couldn't. Not without rewriting the covenant, not without admitting they'd misread it, and certainly not without becoming a laughingstock. I closed the binder, leaned back, and smiled. Calm, quiet, victorious. I think that settles it, I said. One of the board members mumbled under her breath, I just wanted a quiet neighborhood. Me too, I said. Me too. But apparently, peace comes with a few hens and a lot of paperwork. The room went silent for a moment. Then a couple of members shrugged, muttered about moving forward and better communication, and the vote finally passed unanimously against taking any action. Victory! I stood up, shaking hands with the few members who had the courage to admit reason had won. Some offered apologetic smiles, others avoided eye contact entirely. Outside, the neighborhood waited, some cheering quietly, some still muttering over fences. The hens clucked, as if they'd been the true judges all along. I glanced at Karen the clucker and whispered, "We did it, kid." Beyoncé preened, hens solo strutted, and I realized something important. It wasn't just a win over the HOA. It was a win for fairness. For humor. For standing your ground when absurdity knocks at your door. And, honestly, for breakfast. Because sometimes, the eggs you fight for aren't just eggs, they're proof that persistence, cleverness, and a little bit of defiance can topple even the strictest, stickiest rules. We walked out of that clubhouse victorious. The hens were safe. The neighborhood had seen the absurdity for themselves. And the HOA? Well, let's just say the cracks had become a chasm. The war wasn't over, technically. But in that moment, in that suburban battlefield, I felt like a general returning home. Arms full of binder, heart full of pride, and 6 chickens who had, without realizing it, taught an entire board a lesson in humility. The morning after the hearing, I stepped outside with my coffee and felt something I hadn't felt in weeks: peace. Not the quiet before the storm peace, but the kind that settles in your chest and refuses to leave. The hens were out in the yard, strutting like they just won the lottery, which, in a way, they had. Karen the clucker pecked at the grass with all the authority of a feathery mare. Hen solo preened as if to say, "Look at me, I'm untouchable." Beyoncé, of course, lounged in the sun like royalty. I leaned on the fence and took it all in. The HOA had quietly backed down. No new letters, no fines, no threats. Officially, nothing was said, but the message was clear: we had won. I laughed, almost in disbelief. For months, I'd been living under a storm of letters, inspections, and board member stares. And now, victory felt surreal. Even better, the neighborhood slowly shifted. Those who had once avoided me started showing up again, sheepish but curious. One neighbor, the one who had left the first "remove the animals" note, came over with a basket. Hey, she said, looking slightly embarrassed. I made some muffins. For the hens. And, well, you too, I guess. I smiled. Thanks. They'll love them. And so will I. Another neighbor, the quiet one who'd been suspicious of our little rebellion from the start, stopped by a week later. Can we buy some eggs? She asked, holding out a container. Eggs. My eggs. I almost laughed out loud. The same people who had criticized, whispered, and complained were now knocking at the gate asking for breakfast. It was poetic justice. And it wasn't just the food. It was the symbolism. What began as defiance had become community. A shared joke, a small rebellion that reminded everyone what was important: neighborliness, fairness, and sometimes, humor in the face of absurdity. I started keeping a small basket by the gate. Neighbors came by occasionally, dropped off coffee or notes of encouragement, took eggs, or just watched the hens cluck and strut like they owned the world. The irony wasn't lost on me. The same people who had tried to suppress the coup were now participating in its success. Even the HOA couldn't ignore it. The fines quietly disappeared, the cease and desist letters stopped, and the official record was silent. It was as if they'd collectively decided that continuing the fight wasn't worth the humiliation or the lawsuits. That day, I walked around the yard and looked at my feathered friends. Each hen had become a tiny emblem of victory. Not just because they were free to live legally and happily, but because they'd shown me the power of persistence, research, and a little humor in adversity. I realized that the war had never really been about chickens. It was about standing your ground, defending what's right, and not letting petty authority crush something small, harmless, and good. Sunlight began filtering through the trees, painting the yard in warm, golden hues. The hens clucked softly in harmony, stretching their wings and pecking the fresh grass. The moment felt cinematic, like a slow-motion victory scene from one of those feel-good movies you pretend not to cry at. I snapped a few photos, not for social media this time, but to remember the peace. The calm after chaos. The triumph of small victories over bureaucracy. The kids ran out to the yard, laughing, feeding the hens, and marveling at the eggs they collected. "We did it," one of them shouted. "We won." I smiled, watching them. Victory wasn't just mine, it belonged to everyone who had stuck it out, laughed at the absurdity, and kept the faith. Even the neighborhood seemed calmer. The air felt lighter, the lawns brighter. It was as if the collective tension had dissolved with the realization that rules, no matter how strict, couldn't overpower reason and community spirit. Standing there, coffee in hand, hens clucking around me, kids laughing, neighbors smiling from a distance, I knew it was more than just a win over the HOA. It was a reminder: courage doesn't have to be loud to be powerful. Defiance doesn't have to be reckless to be meaningful. And sometimes, a few small chickens can change an entire street. I took a deep breath and whispered to Karen the clucker, perched proudly on the fence, "We did it, kid. Peace is back. For now, at least." The sunrise painted the yard gold. Shadows stretched long and soft. The hens clucked. The neighborhood breathed a little easier. And in that quiet, beautiful moment, I realized something vital. What began as a small act of defiance had grown into something bigger, a community reminded of joy, fairness, and the simple power of standing your ground. Victory, I decided, often comes in feathers. Sitting on the back porch, watching the hens cluck and wander freely, I couldn't help but reflect on everything that had happened. It started with a simple desire: a few chickens for fresh eggs, a little bit of self-sufficiency, and maybe a quiet morning without the constant hum of suburban monotony. And yet, what began as an innocent dream turned into a full-blown battle of wills. The HOA, with all its rules, fines, and meetings, reminded me how power can be wielded and abused. Authority isn't inherently bad, but unchecked authority, especially in small communities, can feel like a dictatorship. It's easy to intimidate people when most of them are too busy, too polite, or too unsure to question the system. But here's the thing I learned: rules don't have to be scary. Laws don't have to be confusing. Knowledge is power, and a little research goes a long way. If there's one thing I want viewers to take away from this mess, it's this: know your rights. Read your covenants, ordinances, and neighborhood documents. Don't blindly assume a rule is absolute. Just because someone holds a title or a gavel doesn't mean they're right. Document everything. Seriously. Letters, emails, photos, even small notes about interactions, keep them. If things escalate, this paper trail can be your shield. Calmly gathering facts is far more powerful than reacting with anger or panic. Facts, after all, don't argue back, people do. Humor helps too. A little light-hearted defiance can break tension, remind everyone you're human, and even turn neighbors into allies. Sometimes, the world needs a bit of levity to see the absurdity in rigid authority. And sometimes, that levity is best delivered by a few clucking hens. For anyone dealing with an overbearing HOA, stay calm, stay organized, and never be afraid to fight back with evidence. Don't let intimidation win. It might take patience, creativity, and a few metaphorical feathers in your binder, but it's possible. Looking back, I realized that the chickens weren't just pets. They were tiny symbols of resilience. Each egg laid, each confident strut, each cluck in the morning reminded me and the neighborhood that small, thoughtful resistance can have a big impact. And the neighbors? Many came around. Those who initially whispered, complained, or even left passive-aggressive notes began to see the absurdity of it all. Some laughed, some shook their heads, and some quietly dropped off little gifts, a testament that persistence, fairness, and humor can win hearts, even when bureaucracy seems immovable. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about breaking rules. It was about standing up, calmly and intelligently, for what's reasonable. I often think about that day when I first opened the CCNRS and saw the no livestock clause. At the time, it felt suffocating, like an invisible chain around a small backyard dream. But now, that clause is a story, a lesson, and a reminder that rules are only as strong as the people who enforce them wisely. And sometimes, rules are just words on paper until someone teaches them a little humility, or, in my case, the difference between a rule and a rooster. So, if I leave viewers with one cinematic thought, one truth wrapped in humor and wisdom, it's this. They said no livestock, so I taught them the difference between a rule and a rooster. The hens clucked in the golden morning light. The grass glistened with dew, and for the first time in months, the yard felt entirely ours. Peace returned, quiet and satisfying, like a soft guitar strumming in the background of a sunset. As the camera pans wide over the yard, the hens roam freely, each step a tiny victory. The coops stand proudly, unthreatened, a monument to patience, knowledge, and courage. And me? I sit back, sipping coffee, watching a few eggs roll gently in the nesting boxes, thinking, sometimes, the smallest fighters, the ones with feathers and tiny beaks, can teach the biggest lessons. Fade out. Calm acoustic music. Wide shot of the yard. Chickens roaming free. A gentle reminder that standing up for what's right doesn't have to be loud, it just has to be persistent. Victory, after all, isn't always flashy. Sometimes, it's just a quiet morning with a few hens, a yard full of sunlight, and the knowledge that you did the right thing.